This video was brought to you by NordVPN. Late last month, Somalia's federal government claimed that they'd approved a series of drastic changes to the Somali constitution, which would basically give more power to the president and central government at the expense of Somalia's regional administrations. Now, this didn't go down well with Puntland, the oldest and largest of Somalia's regions, who announced a few days ago that they no longer recognize the authority of the central government, effectively temporarily seceding from Somalia. Now, this comes only a few months after another breakaway territory in Somalia, Somaliland, advanced its separatist aspirations by signing a port deal with Ethiopia. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why Puntland is threatening to secede, why Somalia's territorial integrity is under so much strain, and what's likely to happen next. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So to understand this story, you need to know a bit about Somalia's federal structure. Like many African countries who had their borders drawn by colonialists, there are multiple ethnic groups within Somalia who don't always get along with one another. In an attempt to accommodate these different ethnic groups, in 2012, the Somali federal government, which had just emerged out of a 20-year civil war, passed a constitution that effectively divided the country into 7 federal sub-states. Now, there are a couple of caveats worth mentioning here, especially with regards to Somaliland and Puntland. While the federal constitution and current government claims Somaliland as part of Somalia, Somaliland declared independence in 1991, with the 2001 constitution identifying its territory as coinciding with that of the former British protectorate of Somaliland. At the time, most of southern Somalia was consumed by civil war, and there was a sense in much of northern Somalia that they'd been overlooked by Mogadishu and the south more generally. So you can see why Somaliland, which has been poor but politically stable ever since, didn't want anything to do with the country. While it's not recognized by any other UN state, Somaliland has been de facto independent ever since, with its own government, currency, and security services. Somaliland even hit the headlines earlier this year when it signed a deal with Ethiopia allowing Somalia's largest neighbor to use the Berbera port, which didn't go down too well with Somalia. The other caveat worth mentioning here is about Puntland. Like Somaliland, Puntland established itself as an autonomous region in the 90s, when the civil war was raging in the south. However, unlike Somaliland, Puntland has never sought full independence, rather aspired to be an autonomous entity within a federal Somalia. This is why Somaliland calls itself the Republic of Somaliland, but Puntland calls itself the Puntland State of Somalia. However, Puntland's claimed borders overlap quite significantly with those of Somaliland, and the two states have occasionally fought over the disputed territory between the two of them. Today, Somaliland controls most of the contested territory, although the picture has been complicated by the introduction of a third group called SSC Katumo, who basically want to create another autonomous state separate from both Somaliland and Puntland within this disputed area. Anyway, today Puntland is the largest, wealthiest, and most politically stable state within Somalia. But Puntland's relations with Somalia's central government have deteriorated over the past few years, especially since the election of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud in 2022. Mohamud came to power promising to amend Somalia's constitution and concentrate power in the central government, which he claimed would help Somalia achieve political stability. Mohamud had already effectively centralized power in his own hands by pushing to abolish the position of prime minister and refusing to appoint a new foreign minister until very recently. But it was last month's controversial constitutional amendments, which Puntland had resisted since they were first floated last year, that have apparently strained relations to breaking point. Specifically, the amendments give the president the power to appoint and dismiss prime ministers, which was previously up to MPs, and grants the president increased control over appointments to the Electoral Commission, taking away input from federal states. In effect, the new amendments would shift Somalia from a parliamentary system towards a more presidential system of politics. Now, the current power-sharing model of the government, which ensures the country's 4 main clans get equal representation in parliament, will also be replaced by equal and universal suffrage at the local elections in June. Anyway, while these reforms apparently enjoy the support of a majority of Somali MPs, Puntland claimed that the federal states hadn't been sufficiently consulted and said that they would no longer be recognising the authority of the federal government. In a statement, the Puntland government said that the president had lost his constitutional legitimacy and that Puntland would have the power of a full independent government until there is a federal system of government agreed upon, a constitution agreed by Somalis, and approved through a referendum which Puntland is part of. In effect, this means that Puntland has, at least temporarily, seceded from the rest of Somalia. Given that Somaliland has long been de facto independent, this means that there are sort of 3 states within Somalia: Somaliland, Puntland, and what's left of Somalia, which we might call southern Somalia. Now, as we see it, Puntland's newfound appetite for secession has been motivated by 2 things. Firstly, Somaliland's new deal with Ethiopia. Now, we've covered this in other videos, but basically last year, Ethiopia tacitly recognized Somaliland's statehood by signing a deal to use its Berbera port. This was proof that, even without international support, canny breakaway states can thrive on their own. Secondly, there's also the ongoing Al-Shabaab insurgency. For the past 15 years or so, the Somali state has been waging a war against Islamist Al-Shabaab militants, which have escalated in the past few years as Islamist groups have bloomed across North Africa. As you can see from this map, however, the fighting is almost exclusively centered in Somalia's southern regions, especially around Mogadishu, and there's very little Islamist activity in Puntland. The government in Puntland are probably looking at this and thinking that they're better off going alone, given that the rest of Somalia looks like it's stuck in an endless and escalating struggle with Islamic terrorists. All in all, this is terrible news for Somalia's federal government. Not least because they are already struggling with an Islamist insurgency, a long-running drought, and a resurgence in piracy, but also because there have been intensive signs that things might finally be improving in Somalia. In November last year, Somalia was finally admitted into the East Africa community, and a week later, the UN lifted a 30 years arms embargo on the Somali federal government. Then, in December, the IMF announced a massive debt relief program for Somalia, paving the way for Somalia to eventually re-enter the global financial system. If, however, Puntland decides to secede in full, this could be the straw that finally breaks the camel's back, spelling the end of Somalia as a unified state. Now, watching our videos, it's understandable if, at times, you feel like the world isn't terribly safe. And unfortunately, this can be the case online too. You might try your best to keep everything secure, maybe you rotate through a few favorite passwords online, but that's not always enough to keep you safe. In fact, the most common form of account hacking these days is called credential stuffing. Essentially, if you use one of your normal passwords on a website that's poorly maintained and then gets compromised, you could find that your information ends up landing on the dark web. Then hackers just attempt the same email and password combination on other websites, your social media accounts, streaming services, banks, you get the point. Luckily for you though, NordVPN has a whole bunch of tools that can keep you safe online, with their suite of threat protection tools including a dark web monitor, which notifies you if someone leaks your credentials. It's not just that though, their threat protection can also warn you about phishing links and block malicious ads before you even see them. It really is all-round protection for your digital life. And if you sign up for a 2-year plan using our link, you'll not only get a massive discount, but you'll also get 4 extra months free. So if you want to support the channel and improve our journalism, then make sure you use the link in the description so that they know you came from us. And that way you'll also get their great service at a discount.